All right, guys, welcome back. We're doing another episode of the Car podcast. Unfortunately, Matt from AutoOne couldn't be here today because he's had some other engagements, but I promised him that we'd do a bit of a special episode while he's gone, and I thought that we could do an episode from a mechanical standpoint, looking at some of the really bad engineering failures that we've had throughout time.
It's always engineers, isn't it?
Yeah, that's what I think. But because of the topic, I thought we'd bring in an actual engineer, and this is, luckily enough, my old man, Mike.
Howdy.
What's your qualifications?
Bachelor of Engineering, plus a whole bundle of qualifications of mostly related to big air conditioning. But of course, in mechanical engineering, you look at a lot of stuff and a lot of things. Probably more of the related qualifications is when I was young, my brother and I used to rebuild engines for people. And I did happen to be a race engineer for a certain team. Some of the trophies of which are lined up above us.
Yeah, luckily.
Luckily.
With that said, guys, we'll jump straight into it. And we're going to get through the regular stuff pretty quickly today. And hopefully we'll get into some of our special topic in just a short while. News. Coming up this last weekend, just past, we've had the Sanctuary Cove International Boat Show.
That you went to?
Yes. Now, I went last year, the year before as well.
Yeah.
But one thing I saw a humongous increase of this year is hybrid technology in boats.
Hybrid as in electric engine or electric motor and fueled motor?
Yeah, absolutely. So, well, I guess you'd call it a plug-in hybrid with your $7 million 50-foot yacht.
Because if you leave the plug out, it'll sink?
Something like that. Yeah. But it was really stunning to see going from last year where there was maybe one or two. I think this year we saw maybe 6 yachts with hybrid power on board.
So were they going genset to electric motor, or was it a mixture of drivetrains?
There was a mixture of drive types, but the one that we talked a little bit more in depth with was running drive motor on a shaft that ran through a generator and then had a clutch drive to a conventional shaft output. So they ran 2 motors, 2 gensets, and 2 propellers. When you're in slow speed areas, you could use just an electric. Mm-hmm. And I think they said you might get maybe 20 nautical miles out of that.
That's a lot.
Yep.
That's a lot.
Yeah, at maybe 6 knots.
Yep.
Then you could get, if you're out of the bay, you could use your full diesel motors.
Yep.
Which would give you cruising speed up to maybe 20 knots on a big yacht.
And do they use the electric drives for manoeuvring? Because one of the big problems with big ships historically, and I remember seeing a Wartella or a huge 2-stroke diesel in a ship, and one of the proving tests is how many times, because a 2-stroke can run forward and back.
Yep.
And for those to manoeuvre, they'll literally wind the engine down from full speed and all the way back up to full speed, forward and reverse, to see how many starts they can get out of the air tank to safely manoeuvre the ship.
Well,
so do they use the electrics for manoeuvring?
No, all of the new ships are either running a shaft drive with a gearbox, so they can just go straight forward and back through the gearbox, I believe, or the ASI pod, the Volvo IPS drives. So not so much for that sort of stuff, and I think a lot of the ones with shaft drives are using a bow thruster anyway.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
Really,
makes sense.
Really quite strange, though, to see so much hybrid technology come about in a year. In fact, there was a 25-foot day yacht that we were looking around on, and they have a number of different packages you can buy. You can buy it with a 6.2 Chevrolet-based V8, or you can have any variety of full electric power plants that'll give you quite a few nautical miles of cruising at 20 knots.
Well, it's a logical follow-on if you think about it, because we've been lucky to be in the control centre and the engine room of a cruise ship underway. and they run sets of, and that had big man diesels in it, 4-man diesel sets.
Yep.
And they're primarily diesel electric, and all of their drive and all of their thrust, and particularly the bow thrusters, were all electric drive. So it's a logical consequence, particularly with the, becoming more economical with better batteries, better small motors, particularly given the Tesla move on the magnets and the motors that they use. So that's quite interesting.
The thing that does surprise me on that is that less things aren't just straight up electric petrol, like genset electric combination, because, I mean, it would make a lot of sense for boating.
Yeah.
But there's only recently been a company out of, I think, Canada called Edison Motors, which are trying to repurpose vintage trucks by putting a genset, like a Cat 3460, 3406.
3406.
And then a electric drive motor. But that particular type of setup is so much more economical because you run a diesel engine at a constant speed.
And you run it at its peak efficiency, basically.
Exactly.
And it just stays there. And that's what I was going to mention. It doesn't matter whether you've got a petrol engine or a diesel engine. Typically at a load, its most efficient point for breathing is relatively constant.
Yeah. Strangely, at the boat show, they also tend to have quite a fair few manufacturers bring their automotive vehicles along.
Yep.
And we got to see the new BMW XM hybrid, something like that.
Yep.
And I've got to say, what an absolutely atrocious car.
Why? What drew you to that conclusion?
Well, looking at the model, it's just something with it's not sitting with me well, and I couldn't even bring myself to look at the specs after I saw it because it was such a poor looking car.
Well, and that's subjective, obviously. But one of the things that gets me with you sit behind some of those big X's, the BMW X's, and they are a big thing.
Yeah.
Typically driven by one person, maybe with a school child in the back.
Yeah, actually, that's one of my pet peeves at the moment. Even as a mechanic, is seeing cars with single occupants on the road. But it really got me to thinking. The recent lineups out of German car companies have been a big push for hybrid or complete electric vehicles.
Well, Porsche have announced it. Ferrari, Porsche, all the top-end supercar manufacturers have, apart from a couple of, very obvious people who are building 2,000 horsepower, petrol-powered cars. But it's going to be interesting to see. That is one way of getting off the direct carbon targets that they're given at the moment. And a case in point of that is the little Aston Martin hatchback, which was just a Toyota.
Yes, the IQ or something like that.
Yeah, and the sole reason that was built and sold was to bring their average carbon footprint down.
Yeah.
They planned to sell 4,000, they sold 300, and that was just enough to get them under the target.
Yeah.
So, don't get me wrong, in my relatively sporty car, I sit beside a Tesla, it takes off, I don't even bother trying.
Yeah.
Acceleration and so on. I could do them on top speed, but what's the point of that on a public road?
Yeah, you've got a good point, but it's something to look out for. I mean, we're all looking forward to hybrids or full electrics at the moment, especially in the mechanical game, but it's just such a strange time to see them, and especially with, I don't know what it is, some manufacturers seem to think that because you're making an electric car, you have to make a completely new car design.
I think the market for retrofitting electric drivetrains is just going to get bigger and bigger and bigger.
The Cuban approach.
Yeah, just it's less embodied carbon to take what you already have and replace a part of it than to scrap a whole car.
Yeah.
What's the next topic?
Well, I haven't looked too much into this myself, but I did see a story pop past my newsfeed the other day about a brand new Kia pickup, Kia Utility.
They have come so far.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't really remember them as a young company, but
They were typical of in Australia anyway. Let's talk about Australia. But when Kia first launched here, they were an inexpensive car. They were brought into the market, and they suffered problems. Very much the same way as Great Wall Motors did. I remember that a family we knew bought a Kia People Mover, and
that would have been the first generation Carnival.
First gen Carnival. So I think it had a different name back then. And I recall that the front seat fell out while she was driving.
Yep.
The transmission failed twice. Electric problems. And it was a common thing that you knew people who drove them or bought them because they were cheap cars suffered because of them. The Great Wall, the first release of Great Wall was the same.
Yeah.
But we've just been looking for a new car, and the Kias are up there now. They are seriously good cars. That EV GT6.
For the money as well. Kia has managed to, and Hyundai, their sister company, have managed to create so many cars that embody the perceived luxury of a European car with the reliability of a Korean or a Japanese car at a price point of half.
Yeah, 7-year warranty. What are you going to argue about? I
Exactly.
mean, if you put your money on the table and you buy a car, you want to know that there's a warranty with it.
Now, with the Great Walls in particular, and last episode I think we talked about the Great Wall tank, which will be coming out.
Yeah.
Which is, if you haven't seen, go back and check it out. I think it's a 4x4, full electric 4x4 pickup utility, something like that.
Yep.
Weirdly, with the first generation Great Wall utilities, I think they were based off a licensed chassis design from Isuzu.
I think you're right.
And I think they were the engines were based off of a Mitsubishi design for the first generation, which is really strange that they had so many failures when the Isuzu at the time and the Mitsubishi at the time were so reliable.
Well, even Nissan, the little known fact that the Nissan Pulsar hit the market for young people, young couples, starting families, was an economical. Again, it brought the Japanese quality to a hatchback, and they were powered by Isuzu engines originally.
Oh, yeah. Would that be like the N12 series?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they were reliable.
Yeah.
The engines were a bit rough. They were not hugely powerful. They weren't particularly refined.
It's amazing the stuff that Isuzu's had their fingers on throughout years as well.
You and I have spoken before. Isuzu and Yamaha, behind the scenes, make so many engines, power plants, sections, components, and deliver to others.
Yeah.
Volvo V8s, Volvo racing V8s.
Yep, they were tuned or developed by Yamaha, so I think the heads were maybe done. Yamaha did the SHO Taurus, which we didn't get here, which was a Ford product, which is very well beloved. And
they made blocks.
Isuzu made the Gemini.
Yeah.
Isuzu made the Holden Rodeo, the Frontier, the Trooper.
Yes, I think
many
so.
Vauxhall products.
Yep.
Which is weird because you only think of Isuzu now making the
MUX,
D-Max and the truck.
Yep.
Yeah. Now, something that onto our recall and something that I've actually been thinking about a little bit lately is exhaust systems. I personally have been thinking about upgrading the turbo on my truck, but that would mean including a new exhaust system. But there's been a recall out in the last year.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you. What did you say?
Well, you might not be able to hear me anymore if you drive a new Corvette.
If I drive a new Corvette that's more than 350 kilowatts?
Well, I think that's all of them now, isn't it?
I think so.
There's at least 106
Australian delivery vehicles?
Australian delivered Corvettes, and I think they might have had just over 300 delivered total, something like that.
Yep.
106, or a third of the population, has been affected by a exhaust noise recall.
Yep. Unusual to see the government step in on such things, particularly when it's well known that many people that take delivery of Harley Davidson is a classic. They make you sign a document that when you take delivery of a Harley that says, I understand it came with a stock compliant exhaust.
Yeah.
And how many of those last more than the first week. But it's interesting to see them, applying the Australian design rules to a vehicle based on noise. I understand it. A lot of the cars you hear now are much louder because they're squeezing more power, they're squeezing more revs.
I can tell you exactly why I believe it's happened.
Mm.
What will have happened is some larrikin with his brand new, say, maybe a Z01 Corvette with the factory upgrades, has gone ripping around town, making a lot of noise from 0 to 60.
Yep.
Has been pulled over by a police officer.
Do you mean 0 to 60?
Oh, well.
Yep.
American or
Australian.
Has been pulled over by a police officer for noise and tested on the spot and told it fails.
And then sent for a defect and an inspection.
Yeah, and gone, hey, it's a stock car over and over again, and either gone back to the government, gone back to Corvette, GM SV.
Yep.
And
You're in trouble.
Yeah, asked for a big thing.
We actually saw that. I don't know if you remember when we were racing. We took one or two of our toys out to a downshift meet just to display them. Couldn't run them around.
Yep.
And there was a major traffic police sting parked right outside the ground.
Yes.
And there was a chap who had brought down in those days, a new HSV, and the police had him at the side of the road on exactly that target, and he was saying, I'm the dealer, this has got dealer plates, it's a stock car.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if it's been through it before somewhere else that we haven't heard of.
There's another one, I can't remember if this was actually a recall that happened or if it was just a rumour that spread around the internet, but I believe there was some concern with the G63 AMG. G-Wagons, because I'm not sure in Australia if you can have, on a Australian delivered vehicle, if you can have side exiting exhausts.
It's a good point. I'm not really familiar with the ADRs. I have looked over them at some times for some reasons, and I think you might be right. For passenger vehicle, its side exhausts are not permitted.
Unless it's an import. Unless it was fitted factory as an import and it's within a particular noise regulation.
Yeah.
So
if you're fortunate enough to drive one of those beautiful big Corvettes, fair chance that you're going to have to go to see Matt and ask for an X-Force or a...
Well, normally people go for an aftermarket exhaust and looking
to make it louder.
Loud. But it does bring us into our products for the evening, and even though Matt's not here, we did get the download from him. If you need any exhaust products for your generic branded vehicle, Matt stocks a wide range of, I believe it's exhaust hangers, rubbers, mounts, some gaskets, all that stuff. And he's also let us know that he can get X-Force and Redback systems as a local product.
Yep.
If they're made for your car. And X-Force does make some really nice systems, don't they?
We had an X-Force on a Commodore Sport that we had. It was only the 6-cylinder.
Yes.
So it was based on the Buick 3.8, that venerable engine that served decades and gradually got updated.
Yep.
But exactly that, pacemaker headers, high flow cats, and an X-Force exhaust just made that engine sweet.
Now, I remember you telling me about this car plenty of times, and I barely remember it. Was it VSVT series?
VX2.
VX2.
Yep. Now,
correct me if I'm wrong, that made a huge improvement on your fuel economy.
Absolutely. It improved it across the board. I could get more than 1,000 kilometres of range on the tank in country driving.
Yep.
I'm not allowed to officially tell you that it was faster than the supercharged V6 of the time.
The XU6?
Oh, well, they released the Commodore with the supercharged as well.
Well, they had the Commodore supercharged and they had the XU6.
XU6.
Now, if you have been down to the AutoOne Browns Plains store, You might have heard about their semi-regular car meets. It is the only place I have ever seen an XU6 in the wild. And I didn't just see one, there was 2 or 3 there at the same time.
They're a car that, last I saw it going up in value.
Yeah. I've seen a lot of HSVs going up in value.
And Matt also supports redback exhaust.
Yep.
We had on that Mitsubishi Lancer Sport, we had 2.4 litre. We had redback
redback header.
Yep, on that.
And then we had a custom mid-pipe and rear section made for it. But to be honest, the performance in most of these cars come from the header design, and it's something I was talking with a younger mechanic or a younger apprentice I know the other day. It's something that you saw a lot in really old cars where they'd just slap a log manifold on the side of a thing.
Yep.
And hope and pray for the best. And it's amazing the difference it makes. I was looking more at intake side on a 62 Falcon.
Yep.
It's a XK or XL series with a 144 cube. They've got a inline 6 with a single carburetor in the middle.
Yep.
The middle 2 plugs were running really rich.
Really rich. Crazy rich, yep.
The outer 2 plugs were running lean when I changed the plugs on it.
Yep, and it's unavoidable, and it's to do with the draw length, the pulse duration.
And how much consumption on the first 2 cylinders.
Yeah, and part of it is because of that direct short path from the piston through the valve to the carburetor. As those pistons are drawing, it's a much more direct draw.
Yeah.
And you get you need to run that side rich. It's actually deliberate. You need to run that side rich so that the leaned out cylinders still survive.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
So if you're mildly interested in performance in your car, I would say, so long as it's not a turbocharged car, I would say best place to start is an intake and exhaust and potentially a tune-up. Even if it doesn't make it that much quicker, you will feel like you're going faster. You will feel like you're having more fun in a car if it's making a little bit of noise. And the best thing about a lot of the X-Force systems is they have a dual mode. So they've got a valved exhaust that'll make it quieter for when you
can choose to out of the X-Forces. I'm pretty sure you need to do your research. You really need to do your research. Remind me, I've got a story about one of my university lecturers and exhausts that we can cover when we get to interesting engineering over packaging versus build discussion coming up later.
Well, I think we've covered it all. Shall we get into this?
I was going to say, so the Nissan Z that sits out in the driveway.
Yes.
When you're talking about exhaust, do your research. As Lachlan says, a lot of the older engines were just bare T manifolds or short manifolds straight to a tube, and that's it. Modern cars, a lot of the modern cars are a lot better in breathing because they have to be to meet emissions. You can't have 2 cylinders running super rich and the rest lean unless you're doing oxygen sensing on every cylinder, which is too expensive. But the Nissan Z is a prime example that a lot of the boy tuners, not the boy tuners, but a lot of the tuning society go to the exhaust. They want loud and they want power. There's various tests you can find online with changing the exhaust, systematically changing each piece, and the gains to be had on the exhaust in that street car with that engine are minor. The gains to be had are on the inlet.
Yes, that wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of the newer cars have got fairly sorted exhausts.
Yep.
But
it does sound good and it does feel good.
Yeah, and until you put the, extra long tube 3-into-1 headers on it, and then it sounds like a small child with a trombone.
Perhaps, yeah.
Perhaps.
Yeah. So what's the next topic, mate?
Well, our special topic for the night is why we've got Mike here at all. We want to beat up on the engineers and give them a chance to defend themselves at the same time. Now, it's not.
We get a chance to defend ourselves too.
It's not your exact area of specialty, but
I'm old and I'm an engineer.
You've been around the block.
Yep.
So, couple of really interesting things that we're seeing lately in new cars that, as mechanics, just don't make sense anymore. I'm talking packaging, failure rates,
Yep.
or even worse, components that seem to be added unnecessarily or taken away without warrant. So recently, one thing that's been really getting me is either the introduction of brake fluid level sensors and secondarily, the taking away of coolant gauges. I've had at least 2 issues with brake fluid level sensors recently, and I've also had a couple of issues with coolant gauges. The one that really gets me, though, out of all of these like generic stuff, is brake pad wear sensors.
Yep. So I understand why manufacturers do it, but I think too often they get caught up in adding every sensor to protect the vehicle, protect it against warranty claims, and maybe safety aspects as well. But it gets to a point where there's a vehicle that's in our family fleet, which is the top of the range with every sensor on it, and it sat as a new car in the shop for almost 3 months because it kept throwing loss of traction warnings, engine warnings, brake warnings, proximity warnings because cars were nearby.
That was under warranty, and it went in. And what did they replace in the end? They replaced a BCM module. We picked it up.
They replaced the transmission module.
Yep.
That didn't solve the faults. They replaced a body control module.
That didn't. You picked it up for the body control module.
Yep.
And it died on the road home.
Drove it less than 700 metres before it was warning me as a 4-wheel drive with Pilot Sport tyres on it, a clear day at 50 kilometres an hour that I had lost traction.
Yeah. And then what did it turn out to be? An indicator stalk.
A sender in the indicator stalk.
Yeah.
So it was trying to correlate, differential speed, whether it was going around a corner, whether the vehicle had changed attitude, whether it had slowed down.
Yeah, and it was using the indicator input as your motive.
Yeah, as a flag to say, hey, I'm about to turn.
Yeah.
And then when all of these other sensors said it wasn't turning, it concluded that it was either skidding or had run into something or had lost traction or all sorts of stuff.
Yeah. Now, but the brake pad wear sensors for me are particularly bad. So I went and saw a friend of mine who's also a landlord with an 07 model Volkswagen.
Yep.
The thing with this vehicle, the pad wear sensors had come in contact with the rotor with more than 5 millimeters of pad material left. On a vehicle that started with 10 or 12 millimeters of pad material, it was contacting all of the pad wear sensors with half of the pad material left.
Still left. Yeah. There's as an older engineer, I'm conscious of what we try to leave for the younger generation, that we don't waste material, that we don't throw things out that are not needed to be thrown out. The world is getting better at carbon and the rest of it.
Yeah.
And then you have a system that says, oh, this is dangerous when it's barely 50% used.
Yeah. And not just that, these things should be inspected at service anyway, which should be happening 15, whatever, 1,000 kilometres. And they should be replaced as needed at service or recommended as needed at service, which means that these components, the pad wear sensor, is basically useless. Now, the thing that bothers me potentially the most out of the Volkswagen pad wear sensors is, and I think the BMW pad wear sensors as well, they're slightly different. With the Volkswagen in particular, they're a 2-wire sensor that look for the wire to be broken. Okay, whereas with, say, a Fiat Abarth, which I've had quite some experience on, they're a single wire sensor that look for the wire to make contact with the rotor. What that means is, if you decide you want to ignore the pad wear sensor because you've still actually got 50% of your brake material left,
and you wear through it,
on a Volkswagen product, well, like this Touareg, you can't unplug the pad wear sensor. On a Fiat product, you could.
Yeah.
And it would just function as normal.
Yep.
So it just makes no sense to
And
me.
the same with brake fluid. It's critical, should be checked.
Yes.
To know that the level is okay doesn't tell you that the fluid's okay.
Yep.
And what does the car do if it senses the fluid level low?
Nothing. It throws on a whole bunch of warning lights. So I saw a Renault Megane RS recently. Diagnostic procedure was it was throwing intermittent codes, but it was throwing random codes that would not correlate to a particular problem. Went through the diagnostic procedure, ended up clearing the codes, drove it down the guy's driveway, and the brake warning light and the ABS light and the ESP light and the maybe the cruise control light all come on intermittently. You log back into the car, no fault codes. So I went through, this doesn't make any sense, maybe it's a pad wear sensor. I ended up topping up the brake fluid because it was maybe a little bit low.
Yep.
It made no difference until I unplugged the brake fluid level sensor and it went away permanently.
So that's a useful sensor.
Yeah, it's a sensor that's failed, causes bright flashing lights and noises to come on the dash when
to
you're
distract
driving,
you when you're driving.
randomly.
Yeah.
And that is one thing, engineering, but it's probably more software engineering that I have taken issue with on my personal Fiat, is if you're driving at night with headlights on and it has a low fuel warning, it pops it up on the dashboard with a tone at full daytime brightness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the second part of irony, we're talking about sensors interrupting when they shouldn't. The Sony Professional 7 Series 4 camera that we're videoing on shut down on high temperature, but it only shut down on high temperature because the setting is set to medium, not high.
Yeah.
Well done.
Brilliant. So, brake fluid level sensors need to go.
Yep.
Brake
Check your brake fluid. Change it.
Brake pad wear sensors need to go. Coolant gauges need to come back.
Well, that's an interesting thing. And we discussed the fact that so many cars now don't have a coolant gauge. The car might simply go into limp home mode if it thinks it's got a problem. It may alert you.
Yep.
But one of the things is that, and it's evident on some of the cars that we've had in our fleet and have in our current vehicles, that it shows you exactly the same temperature, no matter how hot or cold it is outside, or how hard you're driving, or if you're towing a trailer or not.
Yes. Yep.
Until it's abnormal.
Yeah, which is
It's not a gauge.
To be honest, though, that is okay. To have a gauge that goes, I'm within a window, I'm okay, and then to go up to only raise past a point, that's okay. I'm working on a 90s Fairlane at the moment, and it's got a temperature window on the gauge that it sits within.
Cars used to always have that.
Yeah.
Yep.
The one that bothers me the most, though, is just the idiot light on the dash. So, red light for hot, blue or green light for cold. The weirdest thing is, I've had a number of calls throughout my mechanical life now for a coolant light on dash, which was just a blue light for the first 5 minutes of driving.
Trying to show you that it's cool.
Yeah. So...
Yep. And so the Mitsubishi 4G69 that we had,
Yep.
I wouldn't have minded that because until it was to the minimum temperature that they set in the ECU, the engine is rev limited to stop oil foaming and make sure that you've got sufficient lubrication. I get it.
Yep.
But there was once or twice when it was a cold winter morning when I was in a country town, pulled out onto the highway, went to merge and accelerate, not dangerously, but there's a truck somewhere behind, and it got up to 5,000 revs and that was it.
Yeah.
I would have preferred a little reminder there that you do not have revs available, because a lot of cars nowadays, and people might not notice in day-to-day driving traffic, they will self-limit the revs until oil particularly is up to temperature.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yep.
Um,
So we can agree and disagree on that topic, I think.
yeah, I think on those ones, I mean, we're all pretty. It's a consensus.
Yep.
Like, pretty much. There's nothing that's more frustrating than having stuff that you don't need, and not having stuff you do.
Yep.
Some other stuff you brought up though.
In terms of topic of the day type stuff?
Well, absolutely.
Yeah, so we were talking, Lachlan and I sometimes have robust discussions about why did the engineers do this, or why is this way.
I've had that discussion with a lot of engineering types.
Yep, and even with non-engineering types, but almost daily. Huh?
Pretty much anyone who will listen.
So it's important to understand that, like anything, there's good engineers, there's bad engineers, there's rushed projects, there's projects that have enough time.
There's a budget as well.
There's a budget.
Unfortunately.
So in terms, we were talking earlier about exhausts.
Yep.
So when I was an engineering student at uni, we had a lecturer who was a PhD doctor from the UK, had worked on the British nuclear submarines as a gas flow expert.
He couldn't tell you about it, but he did.
Well, apparently he worked on the British nuclear submarines. He didn't tell us exactly what he did, but he was a gas flow fluid dynamics man. He migrated to Australia and got a job with Ford. And at the time they were developing, might have been a 4.1 litre engine in those days, going into family sedans and wagons. And he was tasked with developing, and we were talking about headers and exhausts.
It wouldn't be the kind of engine in a car that made you think, ow.
could be. And anyway, after the first 2 weeks, they came down to ask him where he was up to with the exhaust. And he responded to them, this is his telling of it, that he'd done the mass flow calculations, he'd done the primary sizing, he'd studied the overlapping pulse generation at various engine speeds to optimise the header joining points and the diameter where they join, to which he was abruptly told there's a clay model downstairs, you get down there, you bend up a piece of wire and see what fits. Mm-hmm. And that was from that era where just adding headers and a reasonable exhaust would bring your car alive.
Funnily enough, though, I think if it's a particular 4.1 litre engine that you're referring to, they were surprisingly not too bad on performance in the end.
They weren't too bad by the time they'd gone through a few iterations, that's right. And they were actually famous for a few really weird things. And I remember driving one. The suction pressure on the inlet manifold was so bad that the vacuum-assisted brakes would almost kill you because there was so much vacuum. You would go to touch the brakes and you would wind up meeting the steering wheel.
I've heard many stories about good and bad brakes in Ford family sedans of the era.
Yeah. Very, very unpredictable too.
Because I know a police officer who was on patrol at the time, and he said that the Ford family sedans that they were gifted with, they could almost never stop.
Yeah, they suffered two things. They were over-boosted for braking at low speed, but when you looked at the size of the brakes that they had when they were trying to do some high-speed work or pursuit, it didn't last very long. Yeah. Famous.
Now, there is something that I've recently learned about the particular Ford 4.1 motor, and it takes us back to an earlier topic as well, based on the same 144 cube that was in the first generation Ford Falcon that was brought to Australia. Ford Australia, that inline six motor had a number of redevelopments, partially done by the Americans, and then Ford Australia took it over, and eventually we ended up with the Barra from a 144 cube 2.4 litre?
2.3, something like that, yeah.
Yeah. Our modern Barra is
a descendant of that.
Is a direct descendant of a 2.4 litre pushrod overhead cam with poor intake and exhaust design.
Tiny valves, all the rest of it.
In a 1960s Falcon.
As I said, the Commodore, various iterations of Buicks and a whole range of other cars and all the way through to the Commodores, that Ecotec block that was based on I'm going to say a 64 Buick block, and it survived all those years in just continuous upgrades.
I believe that's why they ran rough as well. They were based on a Buick 8.
That was cut back.
Yeah.
Cut back.
What else?
Other interesting things for servicing?
Well, I mean, you were talking about some older problems that maybe you would have seen or heard about in new cars of the time.
Mm-hmm.
Pontiacs?
Pontiac, rest their soul, rest in peace.
Yeah,
goodbye,
absolutely.
Pontiac. But released an SUV way ahead of its time in terms of packaging for a young family or so on. Aztec.
Yeah,
it was called.
Much regarded as one of the ugliest cars of the time.
Horrendous thing, but it had a whole bundle of features. Like the tailgate had cup holders in it.
It was available with a factory option tailgate tent.
Yep.
In the early 90s.
Yeah, I think early 90s. Had a self-fitted tent, cup holders in the tailgate. We had a Dodge Journey that had eskies built into the floor, which was great for road trips. It had a removable esky.
Yeah.
That you could go to your ball game and take the esky out, take it with you.
On the topic of, the first generation CRV had a inbuilt removable picnic table set. Sorry.
Lovely. So that was all very good. It was ahead of its time, and it might have succeeded, number one, if it wasn't so ugly. Number two, if the air conditioning drain hadn't been positioned immediately above the engine and car control ECU.
So let me get this right. Anytime you run the AC, thinking that you're an engineer specialising in HVAC systems, anytime you run the AC in any kind of humid environment, you're running moist air over a cold surface, which is...
creating the beer glass effect.
Creates condensation, dew, which then has to be evacuated through a pipe.
Has to be drained somewhere.
And they put a pipe with water.
With that drain.
With constant water.
Which is very cold, could be 7, 8, 9 degrees.
Straight over the
ECU.
On a computer. Well, depending on how you look at it, it could be a feature.
ECU cooling?
Water-cooled ECU.
So the problem is twofold. If the water gets in, creates a short, ECU is dead.
Yep.
Bye-bye. If the water doesn't get in, it's still very, very cold. Causes condensation inside the ECU. Yes. You get a short. The ECU is still dead.
Well, because even though it wasn't leaking into the ECU was on the exterior of the car.
Yep.
And had the same hot, humid air
going over.
How does the dew point work? It's basically
if you are below the dew point, you get condensation.
There you go.
Which we generously refer to as the beer glass effect. And one bad thing about the beer glass effect is if you're getting condensation on your beer glass, here's a clue for you, it's heating up too fast. Use a stubby cooler.
Okay. Yep. I'll have to keep that in mind. I've never had that problem.
No?
No, I don't.
It doesn't last long enough?
It doesn't last long enough.
Other things of the time, Fiero, like a car called Fire, was particularly aptly named because the subject to conrod and piston failures, which failed in a way that generally resulted in setting fire to the oil and setting fire to the entire car.
Now, it's funny that you say that because the Fiero and the Aztec, both not Australian delivered vehicles. However, they were both Pontiacs. So
they were both Pontiacs.
Maybe there is a reason why that brand doesn't exist anymore.
There could be. So. But then if you go to some of the world's largest manufacturers today, Ford, for example.
Oh, I can't stand it.
Yep.
I can't even think about Ford products at the moment.
Well, yeah, at the moment. And, their push to their EcoBoost for emissions and so on, and I get it. And they've built some beautiful EcoBoosts and lovely concept cars which haven't made it to production.
Very unfortunate. The Ford EcoBoost Formula road car didn't make it to production. That would have been...
That was just groundbreaking.
Priced out at $80,000 or something for a street legal...
3-cylinder, 1 litre...
200 horsepower...
rocket.
Yes.
Yeah, absolute rocket. But so Ford, particularly on the Power Strokes, had arranged the ignition relay modules to sit on top of the engine. The engineering crew reputedly told them that it's too hot up there. They wanted to relocate it. Time, budget, all of that, and they were instructed to beef it up, apparently, enough to last through warranty.
Yeah.
And by the time they finally got to recalling it, there was only a fraction of those cars still on the road.
Yeah. GM suffered a similar problem with their throttle position sensors, throttle control modules, which is we'll bung it in the episode. We have actually talked about that and the GM cover up.
Well, yeah, and we had a cousin with a Barina that just had endless throttle body position issues.
Yeah.
And got rid of it. Couldn't work with the car, couldn't keep it.
Yeah, and the worst thing is when the manufacturer hasn't recalled a car yet, is the owner is paying for all that, and then a couple of years later they come out with a recall. Ford's door lock problems at the moment. I know a number of people who were paying full price for a single replacement or a double replacement door lock on this is an engineering fault, I believe.
I've not heard of it.
I don't want to get myself in hot water here. It's a door lock for a vehicle.
Yeah.
Where the internals are partially made of plastic.
It sounds well. I mean, you can get engineering grade plastics.
Quite sure.
Whether you get them on the budget that's appropriate is another matter.
Yeah, unfortunately, the Focus and Fiesta and I think some other cars were fitted with these semi-plastic door locks, and they fail at a rate which is unbelievable. And it, unlike every other door lock, which fails and keeps the door closed,
they fail and
leave the door hanging open. So you can't lock the car, you can't drive the car anywhere because the door's open.
Sounds like a safety feature to me.
It really does.
Other things we were talking about. I forget what model. Oh, Series 3 RX-7s.
Yes.
You would love to work on those to change a fuel filter.
I'm sure I would, but why?
You'd love to work on them to change a fuel filter because so many of them suffered badly from fuel starvation because of blocked fuel filters. Owners and mechanics could not find the fuel filter. It was handily tucked up behind the rear subframe, above the diff and beside the torsion bars, right up where you had to remove the rear suspension and the subframe to change the fuel filter.
Okay.
Sounds like a good choice of packaging to me.
I'm sure that Snap-on sells a tool that you can get straight in there nowadays. Now, packaging is one area which I think is... All the other areas, we could maybe excuse to budget or overthinking.
Yeah.
Essentially overthinking. I think we'll wrap this up by talking about packaging, because it is the one inexcusable fault amongst engineering. And it's not to say that engineers get it wrong or car manufacturers get it wrong. In fact, there are some really beautiful examples of packaging. So the ZRE 152 Corollas, circa, and I think the 122s, 122 Corollas, circa like 03 to 2012.
Yep.
So, had the 1.8 litre, and every one of those fitted with the, almost every one of those fitted with a spin-on type filter, had a little V-shape notch extended underneath the filter, where when you undid it, it would...
And you invariably spill oil because it comes out.
It would collect all the oil onto the point and drip straight down into a drain pan.
And that drain pan at that point is open to your drain below, and everyone's happy.
Yeah. Brilliant. 2 cents material.
Great idea.
Yeah.
One of the beautiful things in packaging, one of the first Nissans that I owned, I used to notice that whenever I put it into reverse, the air conditioning compressor came on. And luckily, in those days, I knew some guys in Nissan Australia when they had technical people. The reason for it was in winter, your air conditioning doesn't run for a long time. The seals dry out. Come summer, you want to use your air conditioning. The gas is gone. You're up for a $700 repair.
Brilliant feature.
Yep, just run. Your car's going to be in reverse for a minute or two a day, maybe. Who cares if the air conditioning compressor runs for a minute or two?
And
lubricates the seals.
Remembering that the oil in an AC compressor is suspended in the gas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you may as well lube the system, lube the seals. Just a great idea.
Yeah. Now, while Toyota on the 152, 122 Corollas had some brilliant packaging, on the late model Hilux, the GUN 26 Hilux,
Yeah.
the oil filters sit on the right side of the motor, halfway up, over the suspension subframe.
Yep.
So I've been trying relentlessly to get one out without spilling it everywhere, and so far I've had next to naught success.
Have you used the punch through hack?
What, punch through the
Punch
filter?
a little hole in the filter, drain it out first.
I've actually used a very old school mechanic taught me a trick where you, and this is for the home gamer, this will be our tip of the day. If you've got a filter that's in a particularly bad spot, not necessarily the worst because some things are unavoidable, take the filter box, extend it out to its full length,
Yep.
unfold it, take the shiny side up, fold it into a little V, the full length, and stick it underneath, point it at your drain tray.
Yep.
It'll act like a luge funnel.
Yep. And away you go.
Away you go. Doesn't work on the GUN 26 Hilux, as I've now found out.
Sounds like you're in trouble there.
Yeah.
Speaking of things that are difficult to service, I think you've got something down beside you, which to me, again, a lot of engineers are putting a lot of time and effort, and a lot of people around the world, to saving resources. So this has arrived for delivery today.
Yep.
This is off which vehicle?
BL Mazda 3, 2008 to 2012, but BMs, which is the through to like 17,
Yeah.
and I think the BN, which is the new one, also suffer from this particular problem. This is going to bring us into a...
So did this driver have a crash or crack their taillight assembly or have a bump or hit a fence? What was the reason that they need to order a whole taillight assembly?
Complete new taillight assembly of many hundreds of dollars because of a blown bulb.
A blown bulb.
Yeah,
An LED, I will guarantee.
Yeah, these have got an LED light internal, and a lot of new headlights have LED lights internal. When they blow, because they are not resolderable or replaceable,
Yep.
you end up replacing a complete module. Now, I have heard of complete horror stories out of, say, one of the French manufacturers,
Yep.
Through English mechanics channels that I
follow. Yep.
Of headlight assemblies costing 1,700 British pounds.
Yeah.
For a single replacement headlight. And I think this one in particular, we've got some suppliers we work with, including AutoOne Browns Plains. Going to bring us to our second product of the day.
Yep.
Taillights, headlights. If you're going to go, if you've got LED bulb failures, check out the team at AutoOne. They should be able to help you out, and hopefully they'll give you a better price.
And again, it amazes me in today's time that we still have cars built with standard halogen bulbs, which are the $2 bulbs.
Yes.
I think every car that we've ever had that has had halogen bulbs, the first port of call has been to at least upgrade the bulbs.
Yep.
Or to add driving lights, depending on what we're doing. Go and see them. Go and get what you need because you need it.
Yep.
It's safer. It's known to be safer. Make
Yep.
yourself safer, make your car look better.
Now, let's finish up on an interesting note from LED bulb failure. I recently saw a Hyundai, and this is going to tie back to the start of our special topic as well. I recently saw a Hyundai Elantra with LED daytime running light failures
Yeah.
that just so happened to illuminate a warning light on the dash constantly because of a noted bulb failure. So LED light failed, and now the warning light's on the dash all the time, and he's quite upset about it, but there's nothing that he can do about it because a headlight assembly is $800, $1,000 or whatever.
I am crying for him right now.
Yeah. I don't know why they ever went away from halogen bulbs for city driving.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
All right. It's been nice. This has been interesting, and let us know how we did in the comments down below. I'm Lachlan. You can find us at KashyAustralia on all of the socials, on Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn. If it's on the internet, we might be there.
You are there?
Yep.
Excellent.
This is Mike, engineer by trade and photographer by hobby, so you might be able to find him at
Focal lengths.
down below. We'll maybe link to that.
Yep.
And of course, our much beloved leader, Matt, will be back in our next episode. You can find him and his team at AutoOne Browns Plains on all of the channels yet again, and we'll link them all down below. Thanks for coming.
Have a good night.